When a person tries to mold you, shape you, twist your emotions, and bend your spirit to fit their convenience, they assume you will stay quiet, compliant, predictable. They assume you will react the way you always did, with softness, with patience, with the willingness to absorb pain just to keep the peace. They believe your silence is surrender, your kindness is weakness, your forgiveness is permission. Your forgiveness is permission, your forgiveness is permission. They believe your heart is an open field where they can plant deception and harvest control. But something they never counted on is the day you would wake up. Awake in a way that no manipulation can dim again. The awakening does not happen in a dramatic burst of rebellion. It happens quietly, like dawn creeping into a room that once knew only shadows. You start seeing patterns you once excused, intentions you once brushed aside, and truths you once avoided because they hurt too deeply to face. You begin to understand that manipulation is not just an act, it is a strategy that requires your cooperation. Without your confusion, without your guilt, without your desire to please, their control collapses, and suddenly they see something in you that threatens everything they built. Clarity. The moment clarity enters your soul, everything changes. Your reactions slow down. Your heart stops jumping to rescue. Your mind no longer bends under pressure. You stop explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. You stop defending yourself to those who enjoy seeing you doubt your own worth. You stop allowing guilt to be the chain that keeps you tied to people who benefit from your self-betrayal. This is when they realize they cannot reach you the way they used to. Manipulators fear the quiet transformation more than any confrontation. A confrontation gives them a stage. Silence removes it. When you become calm, when your voice settles into truth instead of pleading, when your decisions come from dignity instead of fear, they panic. They are no longer dealing with the version of you they crafted through emotional games. They are facing someone they cannot predict, someone they cannot bend, someone they cannot guilt into submission. They are encountering for the first time your strength without apology. And that is the moment they finally understand that the person they tried to control has grown beyond their reach. They see it in your posture, in your words, in the way you no longer chase explanations or reassurance. They see it in your refusal to be drawn into arguments designed to wear you down. They see it in the way you walk away from chaos instead of entertaining it. They see it in the peace you carry. Peace that cannot be bought with flattery or stolen with fear. Your transformation unsettles them because manipulation thrives on darkness, confusion, and insecurity. But once a soul decides to stand in its own light, the shadows lose their power. They cannot guilt you anymore because your conscience is clear. They cannot confuse you because your mind is steady. They cannot shame you because you no longer build your identity on their approval. They cannot lure you back with false affection because your heart has learned that love is not pain disguised as devotion. What terrifies them most is not that you are stronger, it is that you are no longer accessible. They cannot enter your mind, cannot dictate your emotions, cannot predict your choices. You have reclaimed territory they thought belonged to them, and nothing unsettles a manipulator more than losing access to someone who once gave them effortless control. They are realizing now that you cannot be manipulated, not because you became harsh, but because you became whole. You learn to see through masks, you learn to read intentions, not words. You learn to choose yourself without guilt. You learn that peace is a boundary, not a reward. Your strength is not loud, but it is unshakable. And for the first time they feel the weight of your absence, the loss of their influence, and the collapse of the illusion they once lived in. They wanted to shape you, they ended up awakening you. They tried to control you, they ended up revealing your power. They tried to break you, they ended up teaching you how to stand alone. And now, as they watch you walk with self-acknowledge and unwavering dignity, they understand a truth they never expected to face. The person who cannot be manipulated is the one who has finally discovered their own worth. Your awakening destroys their control in a way they never saw coming, because manipulation does not crumble through confrontation. It collapses the moment you begin to see what you once overlooked. Awakening is not a single instant of rebellion. It is a gradual rising of awareness, a soft but unstoppable shift within your spirit, where you begin to understand the difference between caring and sacrificing yourself, between loyalty and self-betrayal, between patience and being used. This inner shift threatens everything a manipulator depends on, because control only works in darkness. Once your eyes adjust to the truth, the illusion they built cannot survive the light you now carry. At first, the awakening feels uncomfortable. You begin to notice how often your kindness was taken as an invitation to demand more from you. You start recognizing the tone in their voice that once made you rush to fix everything. You observe how your guilt was used as a leash, tightening every time you tried to step away. Each realization is small on its own, but together they form a picture you can no longer ignore. You are not reacting the same way, not absorbing their behavior the same way, not offering blind forgiveness the same way. Your spirit is shifting, and they can sense it long before you speak a word. The power they once had over you relied entirely on your emotional participation. They needed you to doubt yourself so they could present themselves as your guide. They needed you to feel responsible for their moods so they could manipulate your behavior. They needed you to worry about losing them so they could keep you from seeing your own worth. But once you begin awakening, each of those strings weakens. You start questioning the guilt they hand to you so casually. You begin realizing that their disappointment was manufactured to control your choices. You notice patterns, repeated excuses, repeated blame, repeated cycles disguised as apologies. These moments of insight form the foundation of your strength, and every piece of awareness steals a piece of their influence. Awakening is not loud, it is not dramatic. It is the quiet decision to observe instead of react. It is the calmness you feel when you finally understand that someone's treatment of you is not a reflection of your value, but a reflection of their character. It is the moment you stop explaining yourself to people who enjoy misunderstanding you. It is the day you choose peace over chaos, even if that peace comes with distance. This silence, this inner steadiness, disrupts their entire blueprint, because manipulation cannot function when you stop feeding it with emotional responses. When you gain clarity, you begin to choose differently. Instead of rushing to defend yourself, you pause. Instead of absorbing blame, you examine the situation. Instead of accepting their narrative, you begin trusting your own perception. These small changes create a ripple effect. Suddenly the tactics that once worked effortlessly fail to reach you. Their guilt trips fall flat. Their anger no longer intimidates. Their emotional storms no longer shake your foundation. You are not fighting back. You are simply refusing to play the role they assigned you. That alone dismantles the power they believed they had. Manipulators often operate with certainty. They expect your reactions before you even have them. They predict your choices because they trained you through repeated emotional conditioning. They rely on the version of you that didn't know you were being controlled. But your awakening forms a version of you they cannot recognize, a version that thinks independently, listens to intuition, trusts inner truth, and does not allow emotional blackmail to dictate decisions. They do not interfere. You do not want to listen to them. You demand trust yourself. Their certainty dissolves into confusion, and their confidence turns into anxiety, because the tools they use to control you are now useless in the presence of your awareness. The most profound part of this awakening is that you do not need to confront them. You do not need to expose them. You do not need to announce that you have changed. The change announces itself in your silence, in your calmness, in your refusal to carry burdens that were never yours. They feel the shift when you no longer rush to comfort them. They notice it when you stop seeking approval. They see it clearly when your emotional responses become steady, thoughtful, and grounded instead of reactive and vulnerable. Your awakening is felt before it is spoken, and that silent transformation destroys their control more effectively than any argument could. Once you awaken, you reclaim yourself. You reclaim your mind from their confusion. You reclaim your heart from their manipulation. You reclaim your life from their influence. And as this reclamation unfolds, they realize something they never expected. The power they thought they had was an illusion, sustained entirely by your unawareness. Now that you see clearly, that illusion shatters, and their control dissolves into nothing. Your silence now threatens them more than your words ever did, because your silence is no longer the silence of submission. It is the silence of understanding. It is not the quiet that comes from being overwhelmed or afraid to speak. It is the quiet that rises after seeing the truth clearly. This new silence carries a weight they cannot manipulate, shape, or twist. It is the silence of someone who has stopped participating in the emotional games that once gave the manipulator power. In the past, your silence was something they counted on. It was the space they used to reshape the narrative, turn blame around, twist facts, or make you question your own memory. Your quietness gave them room to dominate the conversation and secure their version of reality. But the silence you hold now is different. It is intentional. It is observant. It does not rush to fix, soothe, or justify. This silence unnerves them because it represents a shift from emotional dependence to emotional independence. When you stop explaining yourself, they lose their favorite weapon, confusion. Manipulators thrive when you feel compelled to defend your heart, your intentions, your actions. As long as you explain, they can twist your explanations. As long as you apologize, they can demand more apologies. As long as you plead to be understood, they can frame themselves as the victim. Your silence removes the stage they built for themselves. Without your reaction, their performance means nothing. Without your emotional engagement, their tactics dissolve. The unsettling part for them is that silence reveals more truth than words ever could. They sense the distance in the way you no longer rush to respond. They feel the shift in the way you pause before answering, if you answer at all. They see the boundary in the way you no longer offer instant forgiveness or instant reassurance. Your silence signals that you are no longer emotionally accessible to their manipulation, and that realization destabilizes them. The calmness in your silence is what frightens them the most. Calmness means control, not theirs, but yours. Calmness means you are thinking instead of reacting, observing instead of absorbing, discerning instead of doubting yourself. Calmness means they no longer have the ability to provoke those frantic emotions they once relied on to steer your choices. When you are calm, they cannot escalate the situation. When you are calm, they cannot create chaos to cloud your judgment. When you are calm, they cannot pull you back into the cycle that kept you small. As your silence grows, so does their discomfort. Their attempts to trigger a reaction become more obvious, more desperate. They push buttons that no longer work. They make accusations that no longer shake you. They try to guilt you in ways that once worked effortlessly, but now feel hollow against the foundation of truth you have built within yourself. The lack of reaction reveals something they cannot deny. You have stepped outside the reach of their influence. What they never expected is that silence could be a form of strength. They assumed strength meant anger, arguing, demanding respect. But real strength is the ability to stay rooted in your own truth without needing validation from anyone, not even from the one who tried to control you. Real strength is choosing not to respond when responding would only feed their illusion of power. Real strength is letting your inner stability speak louder than anything you could say out loud. Your silence is also a boundary. It tells them, I am no longer available for manipulation. It tells them, I will not argue with someone committed to misunderstanding me. It tells them, my peace is worth more than your approval. And the moment they sense this boundary, they realize the imbalance has shifted. The person they once controlled effortlessly now stands outside their emotional jurisdiction. Silence has always been a powerful language, but now it is a language they cannot interpret or influence. They cannot twist it. They cannot use it against you. They cannot penetrate it with guilt or fear. This silence belongs entirely to you, and it terrifies them because it proves something they never wanted to accept. You have detached. You have grown. You have reclaimed your mind and your emotions. Truth. They are faced with an unsettling truth. Your silence marks the end of their power. It is the boundary they can neither cross nor break. It is the proof that you are no longer who you were. And in that quiet, undeniable truth, they finally recognize that manipulation can only survive where confusion lives. But now clarity lives where confusion used to be. Peace lives where fear used to be. Strength lives where vulnerability was exploited. Your silence is no longer the absence of a voice. It is the presence of wisdom. And that wisdom has become the very thing they cannot control. Your calmness exposes their chaos because calmness is the one thing manipulation cannot survive. When a person relies on emotional storms to unsettle you, to push you into decisions you wouldn't normally make, or to make you feel guilty for simply protecting your peace, they depend on your instability. They depend on your fear, your anxiety, your urgency to fix things. But once calmness becomes your foundation, their chaos loses its audience. Their theatrics fall flat. Their outbursts have nowhere to land. Your calmness becomes a mirror that reflects their behavior back at them, and suddenly they can no longer hide behind excuses or emotional disguises. Calmness shows you the truth of a person in ways anger never can. When you refuse to rise to their provocations, the nature of their intentions becomes unmistakably clear. The moment you stop reacting, their character reveals itself. Without your participation, you begin to see the patterns in their behavior. The sudden rage when they don't get their way, the guilt tripping when you set a boundary, the exaggerated sadness when they want sympathy, the strategic silence when they want you to chase them. All of it becomes visible when you no longer let their storms sweep you off your feet. In the past, your emotions responded instantly to their cues. A sharp tone would make your heart race. A cold silence would make you question what you did wrong. A sudden accusation would force you to defend yourself. But now, your calmness slows everything down. You begin observing instead of reacting. You begin listening instead of absorbing. You begin noticing the mechanics behind their behavior, the way they escalate a situation just when you start gaining confidence. The way they shift blame the moment they feel exposed. The way they pretend to misunderstand you to derail the conversation. Calmness gives you clarity, and clarity is something manipulation cannot withstand. The more centered you become, the more their chaos stands out. What once felt normal now looks theatrical. What once felt acceptable now feels alarming. What once felt like conflict resolution now looks like emotional ambush. Calmness reveals the truth. Their chaos was not a reaction, It was a tool. It was how they kept you unsure, overwhelmed, and emotionally dependent. It was how they maintained control, by ensuring you were too busy managing their emotions to ever examine their intentions. When you stay calm, their attempts to provoke you become painfully obvious. The raised voice doesn't shake you. The sudden accusations don't confuse you. The exaggerated reactions don't guilt you. Your clarity creates a distance between their behavior and your emotional state. You are no longer participating in the cycle. They are spinning alone, and that isolation frustrates them, because chaos only works when someone responds to it. What truly unsettles them is that calmness cannot be manipulated. Anger can be manipulated, fear can be manipulated, guilt can be manipulated, but calmness stands on its own. It comes from knowing the truth of who you are and refusing to hand that truth over to someone who thrives on instability. Calmness is the evidence of healing, of growth, of emotional independence. It is the sign that you have stepped out of the energy that fed their control. Your calmness also introduces something they never anticipated: accountability. As long as you reacted emotionally, they could blame you for the outcome. You're too sensitive. You misunderstood. You're overreacting. But when you remain calm, the conversation becomes a clear reflection of their behavior. They can no longer hide behind your emotional responses because you have none. What they say stands on its own. What they do stands on its own. Their chaos becomes undeniable, even to themselves. The shift is powerful. Your calmness exposes what their chaos tried to conceal. Their instability becomes visible, not because you pointed it out, but because it can no longer blend into your emotional landscape. The contrast between your peace and their turmoil is sharp, unmistakable, and frightening for someone who depends on confusion to maintain control. Your calmness also changes the dynamic of the relationship. They cannot lead you emotionally anymore. They cannot predict your reactions. They cannot use your empathy against you. Your calmness belongs to you, and nothing they do can take it away. This terrifies them because it marks the end of their influence. The storms they used to shake you now pass through you without effect. The traps they set now reveal themselves instantly. The chaos that once controlled your life now only reveals their own lack of inner stability. They realize something profound. You are no longer living in reaction to them. You are living from a place of inner truth, inner strength, and inner stillness. That stillness is not emptiness. It is power. It is the power that exposes their chaos, strips their manipulation of its effectiveness, and reminds them that they no longer hold authority over your emotions. Your calmness didn't just protect you, it revealed them. And once a manipulator is exposed, their influence fades like a shadow under the sun. Your mind is no longer a place they can enter, because awakening teaches you to guard the space that was once easily invaded. Manipulators depend on gaining access to your thoughts, twisting them, planting doubts, reshaping your memories, or distorting your sense of reality. They enter quietly through guilt, confusion, flattery, fear, or emotional dependence. They convince you to second-guess your intuition and mistrust your own judgment. But once you reclaim your inner world, that door closes, and they find themselves standing on the outside of a place they once walked through freely. The shift begins when you notice how their voice used to echo inside your mind, influencing the way you saw yourself. You remember how you once replayed their criticism, carrying it like truth. How their disappointment became a burden you tried desperately to lift. How their anger conditioned you to walk carefully, monitoring every word, every expression, every step. You realize how deeply their influence reached, not only into your decisions, but into your identity. But awareness breaks the cycle. Once you see that their words shaped you more than they should have, you begin dismantling the influence, piece by piece. As your awareness strengthens, your mind becomes clearer. Thoughts that once spiraled into confusion now settle into truth. Doubts that once consumed you fall quiet. Panic that once rose at the slightest tension no longer finds a place to take root. You begin trusting yourself again, something they worked hard to prevent. You start recognizing manipulation not as your fault, but as their strategy. You acknowledge that their control only existed because you allowed their opinions to have more authority than your own. And with this realization, their access dissolves. The heart of this transformation lies in the boundaries you build within your mind. You learn to question the voice that once dominated your emotions. You pause when guilt appears and ask, "Is this truly mine to carry?" You examine fear and ask, "Did this come from someone else's expectations?" You reflect on shame and recognize that much of it was planted by someone who benefited from your insecurities. These questions become armor, protecting the inner space they once infiltrated without effort. With time, your mind becomes a sanctuary, a place they cannot touch, a place where your own voice finally becomes louder than their manipulation. You begin to think independently, choosing your beliefs with intention. You give meaning to your own experiences, not the meaning they impose. You separate your identity from their narrative, and in doing so, you take back the control you didn't realize you handed them. What unsettles them most is that you no longer internalize their tactics. Their guilt trips fall flat. Their accusations no longer echo in your thoughts. Their attempts to shame you rebound against the walls you have built. Their subtle suggestions that you're not enough no longer take root because you've replaced their narrative with one grounded in truth and self-worth. They can talk, but their words no longer enter you. They can try to manipulate, but the entry points have been sealed. Your mental clarity exposes their intentions in a way you couldn't see before. You notice the patterns you once overlooked, the timing of their complaints, the exaggerations in their stories, the emotional traps masters concern. You see how they tried to place themselves at the center of your life, making everything about their needs, their fears, their comfort. And now, in this clarity, you understand that their influence relied entirely on your mental openness. Once that openness was reclaimed, their power evaporated. In your new state of awareness, you no longer anticipate their reactions before making decisions. You no longer rehearse conversations in your head to avoid conflict. You no longer feel responsible for their feelings, nor do you allow their preferences to dictate your choices. Your thoughts belong to you now. Your emotions belong to you. Your decisions belong to you. And without access to your inner world, they lose the ability to steer your life. The transformation is not just emotional, it is spiritual. It marks a deep recognition of your own inner authority, a recognition that your mind is sacred, that your peace is valuable, and that your intuition is trustworthy. This inner strength is something manipulation cannot penetrate. It is something deception cannot distort. It is something control cannot reach. Now, when they try to influence you, they encounter a version of you they cannot navigate. Your silence becomes confusing to them. Your confidence intimidates them. Your clarity renders their tactics ineffective. They stand at the edge of your boundaries, realizing that the access they once took for granted no longer exists. And what unsettles them most is that they have no power to reopen that door. Your mind is your own again, and in reclaiming it, you reclaim the entire direction of your life. Your boundaries are no longer negotiable because you have finally understood that peace must be protected, not hoped for. In the past, your boundaries were soft, flexible, and easily overridden, not because you lacked strength, but because you cared too deeply, trusted too freely, and believed that love required sacrifice. You mistook tolerance for kindness, patience for loyalty, and self-erasure for harmony. But as you awakened to the truth of manipulation, you realized that every time you bent your boundaries to keep someone else comfortable, you abandoned yourself. And that is a wound you refuse to reopen. Your boundaries now rise from clarity, not anger. You no longer set them out of desperation or reaction. You set them because you finally understand your value, your dignity, and your right to emotional safety. You recognize that a person who loves you will not be harmed by your boundaries. They will be guided by them. Only those who sought control ever feared your limits. And now that your boundaries are firm, those who once shaped your decisions through pressure, guilt, or emotional force find themselves blocked by a wall they can no longer push through. A new strength lives in you, the strength to say no without explanation, to say enough without guilt, to say not this time without trembling. You no longer adjust your limits to keep someone happy who cannot be satisfied. You do not shrink yourself to avoid conflict. You do not justify your decisions to someone who never listened to your reasoning in the first place. This unwavering firmness unsettles the manipulator, because they once depended on your willingness to compromise even when you were hurting. But now, your self-respect is louder than their demands. The inner shift began when you recognized how many times you said yes out of fear. Fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of being misunderstood, fear of losing someone who offered affection conditional on your compliance. But you have grown beyond that fear. You have learned that saying no does not make you unkind, it makes you conscious. Saying no is not cruelty, it is clarity. You refuse to give your energy to those who drain it, your compassion to those who exploit it, and your time to those who use it as leverage. You have learned to choose yourself without apology. This growth confuses those who once manipulated you, because their control thrived on your uncertainty. They knew that if they pushed hard enough, you would fold. They relied on your desire to avoid discomfort, knowing you would soften your boundaries just to restore temporary peace. But now, you understand that peace built on self-betrayal is not peace at all. It is a slow spiritual death. Your boundaries protect you from returning to that place. Each boundary you set reveals another layer of truth. You notice who respects your space and who tries to break it. You see who adjusts their behavior and who escalates theirs. You see who values you and who valued only the access you once gave them. A person's reaction to your boundaries exposes their intentions more clearly than their words ever could. Some step back with respect, others step forward with rage. But your response remains the same. Steady, grounded, unwavering. Your boundaries have become a form of self-love. They are not walls against the world. They are gates that open only for what nurtures your soul. You are not shutting people out. You are choosing who deserves the privilege of your presence. And privilege is the right word, because you now understand that your heart, your time, your emotional energy are sacred. You no longer offer them freely to those who treat them carelessly. The greatest transformation is the absence of guilt. You no longer apologize for protecting yourself. You do not feel guilty for saying no to manipulation, no to disrespect, no to emotional chaos, no to anything that asks you to diminish yourself. The guilt that once controlled you has been replaced by a quiet confidence, a knowing that you are responsible for your own well-being, not someone else's comfort. This inner conviction makes your boundaries unshakable. People may push, they may protest, They may accuse you of being difficult, distant, or changed, but you are changed, and rightly so. The version of you they manipulated no longer exists. You are no longer a person who bends until breaking. You are someone who stands with dignity, anchored in truth. Your boundaries are no longer negotiable because your soul has learned the cost of being open to those who only take. You have chosen to honor your worth, protect your peace, and guard your spirit. And once a person reaches this level of self-respect, manipulation loses its grip, access is revoked, and control becomes impossible. Your boundaries are the evidence of your healing, the visible proof that you have stepped into a new chapter where you belong to yourself first. Your emotional independence shocks them because it represents the very freedom they spent years trying to prevent. Manipulators thrive when your sense of self is tied to their approval, their mood, their validation. As long as you needed their acceptance, they could shape your emotions, influence your thoughts, and control your actions. But the moment you learn to stand on your own inner foundation, their entire strategy unraveled. Emotional independence means you no longer look to them for reassurance, permission, or identity. And nothing threatens a manipulator more than the realization that the emotional strings they once pulled have turned to dust. In the past, their approval felt like oxygen. A single compliment could lift you, and a single criticism could crush you. Your emotional state depended on how they treated you, and they knew it. They used it as leverage, offering affection when they wanted compliance, and withdrawing it when they wanted control. You lived in a cycle where their opinion of you determined how you saw yourself, but slowly, painfully, you began to wake up to the truth. No one should have that much power over your heart. Your emotional independence did not come suddenly. It grew quietly from moments of reflection, moments when you realized you were apologizing for things that weren't your fault, hurting over expectations you could never meet, or shrinking yourself to fit into their comfort zone. You began to reconnect with your own voice, one that had been buried beneath their criticism and your desire to be enough for them. You started questioning why their disappointment affected you more deeply than your own intuition. And as you questioned, your emotional world began to shift. This shift became noticeable the moment you stopped reacting to their emotional swings. The panic you used to feel when they were upset no longer rose. The guilt that once consumed you began to fade. The urgency to fix their problems, soothe their ego, or carry their emotional weight no longer felt natural. Your heart started returning to itself, grounding in its own strength rather than depending on their unstable validation. You discovered that you could feel steady even when they were angry, peaceful even when they were distant, secure even when they tried to provoke insecurity. What unsettles them most is the new balance inside you. You no longer seek their approval before making decisions. You no longer replay conversations in your mind, wondering if you said the right thing to keep them calm. You no longer absorb their accusations as truth. You can listen to their opinions without feeling obligated to adopt them. You can hear their criticism without letting it define you. This internal steadiness removes the emotional leverage they once used to shape your behavior. Emotional independence also exposes the emptiness behind their tactics. They notice that the affection they once withheld to punish you no longer devastates you. They see that the sudden coldness they used to manipulate your reactions now leaves you unaffected. They sense that their emotional outbursts don't pull you into the same frantic urgency as before. Their strategies lose their impact, and without emotional dominance, their influence becomes irrelevant. The distance they feel is not physical, it is emotional. They no longer live at the center of your inner world. You are no longer emotionally dependent on their reactions. You no longer wait for their praise to feel worthy. You no longer tolerate their disrespect to avoid feeling abandoned. Your sense of self no longer rises and falls with their moods. Your emotional independence also reintroduces something powerful: choice. You now choose how you feel, what you accept, what you respond to, and what you release. Their emotions are theirs to carry, not yours. Their problems are theirs to solve, not yours. You are no longer a container for their chaos or a caretaker for their instability. You have stepped out of the role they assigned you and reclaimed your emotional autonomy. And this terrifies them. They cannot understand how someone who once depended so heavily on their validation now stands firmly without them. They cannot understand how someone they once controlled through silence, guilt, or disappointment now looks them in the eye with calm confidence. They cannot understand how someone who once broke under their criticism now feels whole despite their disapproval. Your emotional independence means they no longer define your worth. You define it, and a person who defines their own worth is someone no manipulator can ever control again. This new sense of self is your liberation. It is your shield. It is your freedom. And it is the clearest proof that their power over you has ended. Their old tactics no longer work because you have outgrown the emotional landscape where those tactics once found power. Manipulation relies on repetition, the same guilt trips, the same sudden anger, the same strategic silence, the same emotional traps disguised as concern. These tactics were effective only because you were still learning yourself, still believing that your compassion required you to tolerate mistreatment, still hoping that if you just tried harder or explained better, things would change. But now that you see clearly, every tactic they once used dissolves before it reaches you, like a shadow trying to intimidate someone standing in full sunlight. You used to react instantly to their patterns because you believed the problem was you. When they criticized you, you tried to improve. When they sulked, you felt responsible. When they pulled away, you chased. When they invented new conflicts, you attempted to restore peace. Their tactics worked because you carried the weight of every misunderstanding and felt obligated to fix emotions that were never yours. But now your awareness acts as a shield. You have learned to separate your truth from their narratives, your worth from their approval, your responsibility from their emotional manipulation. The first shift happened when you started recognizing the pattern instead of the moment. In the past, every incident felt isolated. One argument, one accusation, one disappointment. But with clarity you saw the cycle, a predictable rhythm designed to unsettle you. Realizing the predictability of manipulation strips it of its power. When you can anticipate the next move, the manipulator loses control. And that is exactly what has happened. Your growth has made their patterns transparent. They sense this immediately. The guilt that once made you crumble now feels misplaced. The silent treatment that once terrified you now feels childish. The sudden anger that once destabilized you now appears theatrical. Their tactics bounce off you because your emotional center no longer sits in their hands. You finally understand that emotional control depends on access, and that access has been revoked. What unsettles them deeply is the absence of your old reactions. Manipulators rely on specific responses because those responses confirm their influence. When you no longer respond the same way, they panic. They escalate. They become inconsistent in an attempt to find the version of you who once reacted predictably. But every escalation only exposes their lack of true power. Their guilt trips no longer work because you have learned that guilt is not love and obligation is not loyalty. You no longer collapse under pressure to fix what they intentionally break. You no longer mistake their disappointment as a reflection of your worth. Your emotional clarity has removed the hooks they once used to reel you back in. Their accusations no longer work because you no longer accept responsibility for their insecurities. They can project, twist facts, or rewrite history, but the moment you stopped absorbing these distortions, the accusations lost their effect. You now see these moments for what they are, attempts to deflect accountability. And once that truth is visible, the tactic dies. Their emotional outbursts no longer work because your calmness disarms them. Chaos cannot control someone who is no longer afraid of it. The storms they create now reveal their instability, not yours. You no longer take their behavior personally. You see it as a reflection of their inner turmoil. That shift turns the emotional battlefield into sacred ground they can no longer trample. Their manipulation, disguised as affection, no longer works because you have learned that real love does not require the erosion of your identity. You recognize the difference between attention and affection, between possession and care, between control and connection. The affection they offered selectively to control you now feels hollow, predictable, and insufficient. Their strategies fail because your soul has awakened. You have developed emotional boundaries they cannot cross, self-worth they cannot diminish, and inner peace they cannot penetrate. This terrifies them, not because they want you to grow, but because their influence cannot survive your growth. What they never expected was that you would evolve beyond their reach. They depended on your old self, the self that explained too much, tried too hard, forgave too quickly, and doubted your own intuition. Now, you have stepped into a stronger version of yourself. One who sees clearly, stands firmly, and chooses consciously. The tactics that once shaped your emotions now appear weak and ineffective. The power they once held over your heart has dissolved into nothing. They are left with strategies designed for someone you no longer are. You have outgrown the environment where manipulation thrives. And once a person outgrows manipulation, the manipulator's power dies completely. Your transformation exposes their intentions, because once you step into clarity, everything that was once confusing becomes unmistakably obvious. Manipulation only thrives when you are uncertain about yourself, uncertain about them, uncertain about what is real and what is distorted. But the moment you begin to see yourself with new eyes, and the moment you begin to trust what your spirit has been trying to tell you all along, their intentions rise to the surface like footprints in clear water. What used to feel complicated now appears simple. They weren't misunderstood, they were deceptive. They weren't overwhelmed, they were strategic. They weren't inconsistent by accident. They were inconsistent to keep you off balance. Your growth shines a bright light on truths they relied on your blindness to conceal. This exposure doesn't come from accusing them or confronting them. It comes from your emotional evolution. You now move differently, calmly, confidently, with a kind of self-respect that forces people's true motives into the open. Your transformation removes the fog they once operated behind. Suddenly, the little comments that once seemed harmless sound sharp and self-serving. The excuses that once felt believable now feel rehearsed. The concern that once softened you now reveals itself as control wrapped in tenderness. Every detail you once overlooked becomes clear, not because they changed, but because you did. When you transform, you stop explaining away the things that never made sense. You stop defending behavior that hurt you. You stop rationalizing patterns that repeated again and again while their promises never did. This shift catches them off guard because your tolerance was their camouflage. As long as you allowed, they could pretend. As long as you forgave, they could reset the narrative. As long as you doubted yourself, they could maintain power. But once you honor your own feelings as truth, Their behavior loses the protection your silence once provided. You begin noticing not only what they do, but why they do it. You recognize how their timing always aligned with their needs, never yours. How their apologies appeared only when consequences approached, not when your heart was hurting. How their affection increased when they feared losing control, and how it disappeared once they felt secure again. Your transformation acts like a key that unlocks every door they tried to keep closed within your mind. What frightens them most is that your new clarity makes their old tactics transparent. They try to guilt you, and instead of feeling ashamed, you suddenly see the manipulation. They try to flatter you, and instead of feeling valued, you recognize the strategy. They try to provoke you, and instead of reacting, you observe. Their behavior no longer influences you, it reveals them. And the more you grow, the more they unravel under the weight of their own patterns. Your transformation also exposes the imbalance that existed all along. You now see how much you gave and how little they reciprocated. You now understand how much emotional labor you carried while they contributed chaos. You now realize how often you considered their feelings while they weaponized yours. Before, you may have accepted this imbalance as normal or even deserved, but your healing pulls apart the illusion, showing you that love was never supposed to feel like duty or survival. This awareness forces them to confront something they never wanted to acknowledge. Their intentions were never as pure as they claimed. Your growth creates a mirror they cannot escape. The version of you who once protected them from consequences is gone. The version of you who once doubted your perceptions has vanished. Now when they look at you, they see the reflection of their own motives. Clear, unfiltered, and undeniable. And the truth is this: your transformation is not just about becoming stronger. It is about becoming clearer. You no longer operate from confusion, but from conviction. You no longer interpret their actions through hope, but through discernment. You no longer bend reality to preserve the relationship, but honor reality to preserve your soul. This clarity dismantles the shadows where manipulation lived, leaving their intentions exposed in a way they cannot rewrite. Your transformation is their unmasking. The person you are now cannot be deceived by the illusions that once comforted the person you were. And as you stand in this new light, with wisdom, self-respect, and emotional maturity, they finally understand that the truth they tried to hide has always been stronger than the lies they tried to build. Your growth became their exposure. Your clarity became their downfall. In the end, the power they once believed they held over you dissolves beneath the weight of who you have become. You are no longer shaped by their expectations, no longer moved by their moods, no longer guided by their shifting narratives. What once controlled you now reveals itself as small, fragile, and incapable of reaching the person you've grown into. Your strength is quiet, steady, and unmistakable, a strength that comes not from resistance, but from understanding. You have reclaimed your voice, your mind, your heart, and your boundaries. You have stepped into a version of yourself they never expected to face. And now, as they watch you move with clarity, confidence, and emotional independence, they force to confront a truth they tried to avoid. The person they could manipulate no longer exists. Your transformation is complete. Their influence has ended, and your life finally belongs to you again.